Okay, great. So before I proceed, I just wanted to ask, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. So mahalo again for your interest in the undergraduate research opportunities program's mentoring grant for summer undergraduate research and creative work again. My name is Noah. I'm the program coordinator at UROP. Today's session is going to cover a little bit about what our program is, if you're unfamiliar. I'm going to be going over some information specifically about this funding opportunity for those of you who are interested in applying, including things like what our application cycle timeline will look like, eligibility guidelines, who, is an allowable applicant for the mentoring grant. And then we're going to look over some information related to what kinds of things we fund, as well as how the proposals are structured and evaluation criteria. And then we're going to wrap up our discussion before we take questions by talking about what awardees can expect, including things like the grant timeline, any pre-funding requirements, as well as what will be expected of the students that you eventually work with. Okay. But first, to start off, about UROP or the Undergraduate Research Opportunities Program, our mission is to coordinate and promote opportunities for all undergraduate students across all disciplines at UH Manoa to engage in mentored research and creative work. And a little bit about our history. We were founded in 2011, initially as part of the UH Mānoa Honors Program, but we were relocated to the office of the Vice Provost for Research and Scholarship as part of an institutional reorg in around 2017 or 2018. Our staff consists of one half-time director, Dr. Creighton Litton, who is also faculty in the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Management, two full-time employees, so myself and our assistant director, as well as two part-time student staff, our program assistants. And when we talk about really what UROP's mission is and what research and creative work at the undergraduate level actually is, we are talking about a definition that's provided to us by the National Council on Undergraduate Research, which shares that it's a mentored investigation or creative inquiry conducted by undergraduates that seeks to make a scholarly or artistic contribution to knowledge. And to this definition, our program incorporates a couple of other criteria. So the first of these, as you can likely imagine, is mentorship. It's the idea that in order for students to become successful stewards of new knowledge, that they will be learning from their predecessors in the field, which you all very fortunately are interested in serving as. Next is the notion that research and creative work constitutes an original or authentic inquiry. So when I explain this to students, I often distinguish research from classwork, right? Whereas the latter is largely about receiving pre-established knowledge. Research and creative work is about the creation of something new. And of course, there's overlap, right? Like your research is always built on a foundation of research that has preceded you. And there are sometimes research components or creative work components in classwork. But still, that distinction is often helpful for them. The third criterion that we incorporate into our program is that any of this research or creative work is disciplinarily appropriate, which is to say that it adheres to the norms, the conventions, or the rules of whatever discipline the research is being done in, or whatever genre the creative work is being done in. It's very important, as we'll talk about over the course of today's information session, that we acknowledge that when we're working with undergraduate students on research and creative work, we are socializing them to think in very specific ways. So, to the extent that we can be conscious about what that socialization looks like, all the better for everybody, right? And then last is the dissemination component. So dissemination refers to the scholarly and non-scholarly circulation of our research and creative work. We have programming at UROP that is intended to aid in this dissemination, it takes the form of presentation events, and the honors program also runs a journal dedicated to undergraduate scholarship. But as we'll talk about with some of our examples shortly, there's also very exciting opportunities to share our research and creative work to broader audiences. Okay. So just a bit more about UROP. We offer funding opportunities both directly to students as well as to mentors. So we're all here today to talk about the mentoring grant specifically, which is an award made via our TRF to mentors who craft projects for which they recruit students. But really, and what the bulk of our work, especially this week, has looked like, our primary funding mechanisms are scholarship funding to students through three different award opportunities. So there's entering research and creative work, which is intended to support students who are just kind of dipping their toes in the scholarly waters and getting training in the fundamentals of their discipline. We have project funding, which provides more money to more advanced students who are capable of developing full project proposals that they then spearhead and complete. And then for those very ambitious students who, in line with that dissemination component we were just talking about, who have their work accepted for sharing at an off-campus professional venue, we provide presentation funding that can be used towards things like travel, um, registration fees, lodging, meals and incidentals, and anything related to the successful delivery of their presentation. So that's funding. And then on the right side of the screen, I have an overview of different programming that our office offers, which includes things like Forager One. So if you're not familiar, Forager One is an online database, very similar. You can think of it as like a LinkedIn, that our office administers for the purpose of connecting undergraduate researchers with prospective mentors. So the idea is that you go in, you create a profile, you being a student or a mentor, right? And then you can search for students who are looking for opportunities, or students can search for you. We also have on-campus presentation venues. So the primary venue that we have is the undergraduate showcase. This is jointly run with the honors program and UROP, and it's offered at the end of every semester during the regular academic year, and then during the summer, we, being UROP, we administer something called the Shure Symposium, which is just like the summertime analog to the undergraduate showcase. The Shure Symposium is actually one part of the Shure program, which is the summer undergraduate research experience that also includes multidisciplinary professional development modules and actually the mentoring grant. So it's a funding opportunity, but it's the third part of the kind of bundle of programming that our office administers for supporting student scholarship during the summer. Okay. So just broadly, a bit more about the SURE program. It was established in 2019 with a grant from the Harold K.L. Castle Foundation, but has been supported every year since with funding from the provost. So it includes all of these different programming items that we just discussed, including the mentoring grant. And we've been able and have been very happy and pleased with some cross-unit partnerships that we've been able to cultivate that actually adds some additional funds to the resources we receive from the provost for being able to fund additional mentoring grant proposals. So the primary partnership that we have is with the Associate Dean and Director for research in the College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resilience, which means that we're able to fund more proposals from mentors in that college. If any of you are aware of the possibility for such partnerships with your unit, please get in touch with us. We're always looking for more. But just to provide a bit of context about the mentoring grant specifically, since the program's inception in 2019, we have received nearly $1.5 million in funding requests from mentors in all disciplines at the UH Mānoa campus. And between the grant funding we received, the partnership with CTAR, and the appropriations from the Provost's office, we've been able to disperse about $750,000 to about 110 proposals. Okay. And if you're interested in seeing the full listing of past funding recipients, those are available on the mentoring grant page of the UROP website. And again, these are across all disciplines. All right. So I saw Ketty in here earlier. I don't know if you expected to see yourself in this presentation, Ketty, but I wanted to provide a couple of examples of the kinds of projects that we've been able to support in the past. So this photograph depicts Dr. Ketty Loeb with her mentees, Kimberly Ortiz and Iokepa Frederick, presenting at the 2024 Shure Symposium. Hi, Kitty. Um, Her project was about creating a matrix of sea level rise policy, and as a result of the students' presentation at the symposium, they were actually able to connect with Representative Amy Peruso from the Hawaii State Legislature who attended this event. Okay. This photo shows a poster presentation at the same event, the 2024 Shore Symposium of Dr. Nu Nguyen and his mentee, Angelina Spicer. They conducted research into fungal diversity across different ecological settings on Oahu. Um, and Dr. Nguyen is a multi-time awardee of the mentoring grant. Okay. This photograph, this was a great project. This was a cross-departmental collaboration between Dr. Andrew Chang from the Department of Linguistics on the left and Dr. Ha'alilio Solomon from the Kawaihuelani Center for Hawaiian Language Studies. They were able to collaborate on a project with their two mentees there in the center on a study of Hawaiian phonetics, Hawaiian language, Olelo Hawaii phonetics. And we really, really appreciated the collaborative nature of their work. This photograph was taken by a mentee who worked last year with two mentors from the Outreach College as they explored all of the kinds of cultural and artistic nuances of hosting the Asia Pacific Dance Festival. So this was a very early summertime project that they were able to work on together. And we're very proud to say too that UROP was able to support their project and their festival after they suffered a loss in funding from the National Endowment from the Arts. Okay. And this is not a photo, obviously, of anybody, but it is a screenshot of an article that was recently published about the research that was being done it was very high level policy research that was being done into challenges regarding SNAP recipients and administrators with collaboration with the Hawaii State Ledge. And this was a project that was led by Dr. Poonam Koral, who is instructor faculty in the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Management. She led a team of three students. They conducted a series of interviews with policymakers at all levels of government, really, and were able to share about their work on Hawaii Public Radio. Okay. So that's an overview of some of the different kinds of projects that our office funds, really, really beyond the initial kind of definition that I provided of undergraduate research and creative work, and beyond those initial four criteria that I shared. Our office is not prescriptive about what your project looks like, and we're very encouraging of research and creative practice across all disciplines. Um, to provide a bit more perspective from the mentor side of things, though, I wanted to share this quote that came from the recipient of a 2024 mentoring grant, who stated in her feedback survey, "I would like to say thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm a very early career researcher, and I benefited from this experience just as much, if not more, than the students. Not only is this a great opportunity for me to demonstrate fundability, it allowed me to practice my management and mentorship skills. I gained a huge sense of confidence in my ability to design and execute independent projects and to be a positive role model for young students in STEM through this experience. And I will continue to encourage students to apply for UROP project funding and conceptualize projects for the mentorship proposal if offered again." A very positive experience for the mentor. Okay. Now I'm going to get into a bit more information specifically about what we can all expect for the 2026 application cycle. Okay. So the application window opened just this past Monday on November 17th and will close on Friday, January 16th, 2026. Um, During this time, you would compose your application, develop project materials. We'll talk about that as a kind of pro tip later on. Because these awards are administered via RTRF accounts, we would also ask during this time and as part of the application process that you verify with your HR or fiscal administrator your ability to manage and administer such an account. And then if you're also looking for any collaborators, maybe students that you're thinking about working with, it's not a requirement that you have those students identified, but it's good to start early. And then if you're also looking for any collaborators within or beyond your academic unit to collaborate with, now would be the time for that as well. Okay. The review period, we're going to move pretty quickly. We anticipate starting reviews as soon as the application window closes in mid-January, and we intend to have everything wrapped up by March. Um, so that review will consist of an initial review by myself and my colleagues, the UROP staff. But we being UROP, we also work with a faculty advisory committee and a subcommittee of three faculty members will be assigned to each proposal and providing scores based on the mentoring grant rubric, which we'll also talk about shortly. Once we receive those scores, staff will reconvene to make final decisions, and then we'll be making decision announcements thereafter. The official award period will begin in April and wrap up at the end of August. So your pre-funding requirements will include things like the signing of an award letter that stipulates the terms that you're agreeing to by receiving a mentoring grant. Um, Whenever you identify students to work with, you'll also be asked to sign a memorandum of agreement between you and them um, that basically stipulates certain terms under which they're agreeing to participate in the mentoring grant as well. This is also the point at which you can begin making any expenditures of your award. And then things will wrap up with a presentation by the student at the Shure Symposium, which is that end of summer presentation event that the Shure program kind of culminates in. And then we have a grant closing procedure as well. And that's the full timeline. This will all conclude by the end of August 2026. So who is eligible to apply? When we talk about serving as a UROP mentor, who's eligible? This can be broken down into two broad categories. The first of which is any UH Mānoa faculty with any of these designations, whether that's instructor faculty, researcher, uh, at the law school, right? Um, and it doesn't matter whether in your faculty role you're tenured, tenure track, or non-tenure. All of the above are automatically eligible to submit an application for the mentoring grant. And then just a quick note too, the mentor eligibility requirements that we're discussing now, this entire kind of hierarchy chart that we have going on here, this applies both to eligibility for the mentoring grant as well as eligibility to serve as a mentor on those other student funding applications as well. Okay. But the second kind of category of eligible applicants includes successful petitioners for mentor eligibility. So we know that not everybody who is qualified to serve as a mentor is automatically classified as faculty um, under these very specific kinds of terms. And so we have a petitioning process whereby, emeritus faculty, postdocs, affiliate faculty, and even some APTs, right? We have a process in place that allows for them to petition to become eligible to apply for the mentoring grant or to serve as a mentor for student applicants to student funding opportunities. And I will share a link if the second category is one that applies to you, I will share a link for that shortly. But I did want to talk a bit more about who is eligible to petition, as well as some tips. So the petitioning process, if you do need to petition, uh, is another one that has to kind of go through a subcommittee review on our end. We also ask for your petition to be endorsed by a faculty member, usually like a department chair or someone in a position of leadership. And just the assembly of all of those different pieces can sometimes take a while. So if you do need to petition, please do so as soon as possible to ensure uh, timely eligibility. Okay. Please note that for the mentoring grant specifically, again, you must be able to manage RTRF, and this is something that seems to vary unit to unit, but you can, again, check with your FA about that. Um, if you do not fall into one of the categories, the subcategories that we shared before, you are still able to apply for the mentoring grant as a partner to an eligible mentor. So that's a partner to someone who someone who has successfully petitioned or a faculty member. And then lastly, unfortunately, graduate students are ineligible to petition for eligibility. Um, if they are, a lecturer, um, in terms of like being hired on as a lecturer as opposed to holding a GA-ship through which they lecture, that's a different story. But the GA-ship does not permit them to petition. Okay. Now, in terms of the students that you can work with on the mentoring grant, they also need to meet a number of conditions. So the first is that they have to be classified Mānoa undergraduate students as of the award period. So let's say that you want to work with a student, but that student is going to be graduating in May, right before the award period starts. They would not be allowed to participate. And it's the same thing for students who are enrolled at other campuses and not at Mānoa. Okay. Um, Similarly, students may not be concurrently funded with any other UROP funding opportunity. So, Student Awards, ERCA project, the ERC award, Entering Research and Creative Work. They may not simultaneously hold that award actively and also participate in a mentoring grant opportunity. Okay. Um, we also ask that when it comes to recruiting students, that you work with your HR representative to make all hiring arrangements, whether that's via Siki or whether that's through the issuing of a stipend for student remuneration. UROP does not facilitate that process. And then finally, the student has to be able to deliver a presentation at the 2026 Shore Symposium, which will take place. We haven't actually set the date yet, but in all likelihood will take place on July 31st in person on campus. Okay. And then there are just some additional restrictions that I wanted to call attention to. The first is that only one proposal may be submitted by each mentor. Only one proposal may be submitted for each project. So let's say you were going to collaborate with another faculty member. We have had people ask this, by the way, which is why I'm mentioning it. But it's not the case that two mentors can submit proposals for the same project, and hope to kind of like bolster their chances of being funded in that way. And then finally, any student who you do recruit to work with you can only work on one mentoring grant project at a time. So we received an inquiry from someone who was asking whether a student actually was asking whether they, different mentors that they were working with could apply for projects that they wanted her to be involved in. And the answer is, I mean, they can apply, but if they're both awarded, you can only work on one of those as the student. Okay. Now, in terms of funding details, we're going to be talking now about the total allowable amounts in terms of funding requests, allowable expenditures and non-allowable expenditures, and the process for award disbursement. Okay. So the amount of money that you can request corresponds to the number of students that you're looking to work with. For one student, you can request a maximum of $5,000, and for two or more students, you can request up to $10,000. And then please note that if in calculating your funding request, you exceed the maximum allowable amount relative to the number of students you're working with, that is grounds for automatic disqualification in the review process. In terms of allowable expenditures, you'll see this on the application form, but allowable expenditures pretty much includes anything that will be directly used to support the student, including the purchase of materials, supplies, services, and any outsourcing that needs to be done to support the student project. It can be used towards any student travel costs, as well as any student compensation, right? Whether it's a stipend or hourly wages. Non-allowable items include faculty salary or overload, student tuition, although if the student chooses to pay for tuition with their compensation, it's a separate kind of question, but it cannot be included as a line item on the budget. And then any expenses generally that are not related to the student project. Okay. A quick note about student compensation as it relates to coursework. So sometimes what we'll see is that students are participating in a research or creative work project and they are simultaneously receiving course credit for that. Please note that as a function of university policy regarding how students can be compensated for credited coursework, they may not be paid for that coursework until they exceed the 45 hours of work that counts towards each credit. So the way that this works is financial aid says, okay, if you're going to be, you being a student, if you're going to be working on a project and you're getting course credit for it, um, we consider each credit as corresponding to about 45 hours of work that you have to do uncompensated. You can only receive compensation for that work once you exceed that 45 hours of work per credit. So let's say a student is getting like 3 credits of directed reading, right? If you want to include compensation for them as a line item on your budget, you would need to factor in that 45 hours of work per credit in your budget, in your student kind of commitment and timeline, and essentially deduct 135 hours, right, for those 3 credits from the total amount of time that the student is going to be compensated for. And again, that scales with the number of credits that the student is receiving. And just as a reminder, again, this is only pertinent to students who are doing coursework for which the project is something they're receiving credit. So if they're taking other unrelated courses, this isn't something that you have to worry about. Okay. And then finally, again, award disbursement. This comes out of an RTRF account. This is something that UROP will work with your fiscal administrator to have deposited to an account whose information you provide to us at the time of application. And any other kind of university fiscal policies, your spending will also be subject to those. So for example, if you wanted to issue payments to study participants, sometimes those have to be kind of identified in Kuali as like a vendor, like each person who's going to receive some type of compensation, a study participant, will have to be identified as a vendor, per university policy. And that'll involve the creation or like the collection of things like their social security numbers. It is very laborious and bureaucratic, but just something to be aware of. And that's only one example, right? Okay. So again, please check with your HR representatives to check if you are able to manage such an account. And again, this varies unit to unit. If you're unable, please work with a collaborator to ensure that all of this administrative stuff can be worked through. Okay. Now we're going to spend some time talking about the application, and I'm going to be going over what we're looking for and what kind of constitutes a successful application. So, broadly speaking, the proposal can be split into 2 major parts. So, all of the kinds of applicant information, the things that you would expect us to ask about, including your departmental affiliation, including what kinds of resources that you have to offer students in terms of research or creative work infrastructure, any information about your department chair, as well as the fiscal administrator that we can expect to work with if your application is approved. That all will fall under applicant information. And then the second kind of more robust part of the application has to do with the application detail section. Okay. So the details encompass 5 scored portions, and those are your mentoring philosophy slash plan, a statement of student outcomes and impacts, and then more briefly, a project description, a project timeline, and a budget itemized and budget narrative justification. Okay. Each of these sections are also, these are the 5 sections that are going to be scored by our faculty subcommittee of reviewers, and they're also weighted differently. So the heaviest emphasis is actually placed on the mentoring philosophy and plan and the student outcomes and impact statement. Both of these sections are weighted at 35% of the final score, and then each of the other 3 are weighted at 10%. Okay. So when it comes to the mentoring philosophy and plan, what we really want to know is what is your perspective on providing mentorship to undergraduate students in research or creative practice in your discipline? And so we have a couple of guiding questions that talk about this, uh, as well as that will help you kind of structure articulation of what your mentoring plan will look like. But I guess since we're talking about all of this right now, what I really wanted to emphasize is for you guys to think about what the value proposition of mentorship is to you, right? As you compose this, we're essentially looking for a thesis statement about how your mentoring philosophy is going to be articulated in the other portions of your project proposal, right? Um, the mentoring plan section of this question is a bit more logistical, right? So we're going to be asking for more information about what your role in the proposed student project is, um, what kinds of expectations you have for your students in terms of time commitment, um, on the same line of thinking regarding planning, whether you've already identified students. And again, you don't have to have known by the time you apply which students you'd like to work with, but if you do not know, then we would like a sense of what your kind of ideal student's professional or academic profile will look like. Okay. We'd also like to know what kind of interaction you'll be having with them over the course of the summer, including the frequency of meetings. And then we're also, like I said, we're very amenable to a number of different arrangements. So if someone's going to be off campus, or if people are going to be working from different parts of the world, uh, we're open to considering those kinds of proposals. We just want to understand in this portion of the application how that all is going to play out logistically. And there's a question. Yes, Saya, I will be sending out recordings, and very happy to answer any questions. Okay. So that's the mentoring philosophy and plan. You really want to think of this section on the one hand as, again, the thesis statement for your proposal. What kinds of mentorship values are you going to be articulating in the rest of the application? And then how will you actually go about structuring your interactions with the student in order to essentially deliver on those values? Okay. Student outcomes and impacts. So in the same way that we were asking in the last section about what the mentor's role in the project is going to be, we would also like for you to think about the role that the students are going to be having in the project, as well as what the learning outcomes are going to be, right? And this can look like a lot of different things. Here we've listed personal, professional, or academic benefits, right? But if there is a certain value system too, right, that you would like for your students to be instilled with at the end of the project, what are those, right? It can be kind of as abstract and as or specific as you want it to, but I can share that our mentors will look most favorably on this statement on answers that are as holistic as possible. So yeah, things like, maybe a journal publication as an outcome, like that's great. Um, but what about in terms of their intellectual or personal development, right? Um, to the extent that you can address the full kind of continuum of student learning, that would be ideal. And then just in terms as too of what I've seen in the 2 years that I've been doing this regarding specificity, um, I wanted to, I guess, offer a tip here for crafting this, which is to think about the kinds of documentation that you'll need in order to actually make your project actionable, right? Very often, what we see both with the mentoring plan and philosophy question and with the student outcomes and impacts is kind of a very general set of responses. And what we always notice is that the best responses are able to speak to things more specifically. So at some point, right, to execute this project, you'll need something like a job description or a research assistantship description. And what I would recommend as you work on this application, if you don't already have that, is to start crafting that and to work backwards from that document to explain what kinds of outcomes and impacts and role and growth the students can expect to receive. Okay, just to really ground the discussion in as much of the project as possible. Okay. And then the last three sections that are less heavily weighted, but also very important for us to assess feasibility are your project description. Well, one of them is your project description. Oh, no, this is the wrong information. Okay, you guys can ignore the first two bullet points. We're only going to be focusing on the third one, from the third one down. But essentially, we want to know what is your central research question, if that's something you already have. We've also seen applications where the research question is something that the mentor wants to develop collaboratively with the student. Again, we're open to those kinds of arrangements, but please be sure to explain how the creation of that research question is actually going to play out, right? This is also the portion of the application where you can briefly provide any theoretical or other academic context to highlight the significance of your project, and to touch on any methodologies as it relates to execution or analysis. Okay. The timeline portion of the application should encompass the entirety of summer 2026. And this is also really important. What we see in how these sections are scored is that sometimes mentors either scale back the scope of their project to fit it within the summer to such an extent that our reviewers don't always feel like the work that's being done during that time is very worthwhile, or they kind of go to the opposite extreme and like overbook the students and plan in their timeline for a lot more work than what the reviewers feel is feasible. Okay. And in the same way we were talking about creating a research assistantship position to describe the student role in your project, you might also think at this point being the application phase, about developing a project charter, so that when you compose your timeline, you're able to do so with enough specificity, to kind of cover things either at the level of every week or at the level of every 2 weeks. Right. We want a sense with your timeline of the kinds of actions that are going to be taken over the course of the summer to advance the project towards whatever the goals are, as described in the project description. And then finally is the budget. So again, the budget will include subcategory calculations of all materials, supplies, services, and outsourcing is one subcategory, of any student travel, of any student remuneration, which can take the form of either wages if you choose to hire them via Siki, or a stipend if you would like the university to issue them a lump sum payment. And then we also ask for a brief budget narrative that justifies expenses. So ultimately, in going over all of these portions of the application details section of the proposal form, what I wanted to highlight is that we really want to be able to see in your project description, your timeline, and your budget, again, an articulation of how your mentoring philosophy and plan and how your intended student outcomes and impacts are going to manifest in each of these, right? So if you tell us, for example, in your mentoring philosophy that a major kind of component of what you want your students to learn, maybe that's an outcome or impact, is something like cross-cultural literacy, right? How is that then embedded in your project description, in your timeline, and in your budget? And then there's a question here. Is the publication fee allowed? Um, Publication fees are something that we can consider, but we will only fund it if there's an agreement in place for the student to be listed as the first author. Um, this is something that this has been kind of an ongoing conversation um, that we've had with mentors and students. And because all of our funding is intended to directly support students specifically, we only allow for publications to be supported when students are listed as the first author. Okay, but yeah, certainly. And this is reflected in the way that each of these sections is weighted as well. Um, we understand that everybody is very interested in doing stellar research, but this is a mentoring grant, and so the research components actually are somewhat subordinated by an emphasis on the student outcomes and impact section and what our applicants are going to be sharing about their mentoring philosophy. Great. Okay. So a little bit about the review process. When we initially receive those applications in mid-January, UROP staff is going to be checking for things like the eligibility of our applicants, allowable funding requests, and whether these proposals actually fall within the purview of our definition of undergraduate research and creative work. We will then be working with our faculty subcommittee to assign scores based on the mentoring grant rubric. You'll see this isn't a terribly detailed document, but we have each of the five sections that we just discussed and how they're weighted, with the highest scores emphasizing things like feasibility and clarity. Okay, clarity, strong commitment, right? And that's where the kind of detailed and uh, the detail and specificity that we were talking about before comes into play, right? Because they contribute to that clarity. Okay. And then the final portion of the review process, again, has to do with UROP staff reconvening in order to go over the scores that we've received from our subcommittee, um, and to essentially decide which proposals are going to be funded out of the $135,000 that we have to allocate. Okay. And then this is just an overview. There's more information for awardees when those are announced, but this is an overview of what you can expect. So, if your proposal is approved for funding, we'll send you an award letter, which will require signature by you as the funding recipient, as well as by your department chair. The award letter will also include a finalized version of your budget, that will essentially constitute a list of allowable expenses that your fiscal administrator can reference when it comes to award administration. Um, We'll also ask as part of the award letter for you to provide any information for an account to which any overage charges can be made. So if you exceed the spending in the RTRF account that we're creating for the mentoring grant, this account will be where those other charges are directed. We talked a little bit about the memorandum of agreement that we're going to be asking mentors to sign with all of the students they work with. And then importantly, because the summer is a really expedited timeline to receive and execute an entire award on, we do ask in the award letter and the mentor-mentee memorandum of agreement for the mentor to agree to work with their students on things like the responsible conduct of research training, any safety checklists, and any compliance requirements if those are necessary, but it is not necessary for those items to be submitted to our office in order for your award to be dispersed. Okay? In terms of student recruitment, we strongly recommend that at the time you receive notification in March of your funding approval, please begin publicizing your opportunity. This has been the most common challenge that we've seen with our funding recipients for the mentoring grant, that they sometimes struggle basically to find students to work with if they don't already have one committed at the time that they apply. So Forager One is an option. You can contact me directly. I administer office communications, and I'm happy to share about any opportunities that our students might be looking for. And then also leverage other resources on campus, right? You can contact the instructors of any summer courses, as well as the communications person in your department or college, who can include your project in an email blast or social media. Can the students we propose in the proposal be replaceable with the available students later? Yeah, so we recognize that things change all of the time. The idea would be though that if you have a student who commits and then pulls out and then you need to find another one, the idea is that those two students would have similar qualifications, similar degrees of interest, right? Would have the same kind of general profile so that they can be, um, so that you can work with them in the same way. And then the student dissemination requirement. So it's a condition of funding, and this is something that the students will agree to by signing the MOA, but it's a condition of funding that students agree to deliver a presentation, either oral or poster, at the Shure Symposium. Okay. Um, if they're unable to make the Shure Symposium for whatever reason, right? Maybe they're traveling or, whatever it is, um, then they are then going to be asked to make that requirement up by delivering a presentation at the Fall Undergraduate Showcase. And then in addition, we're also introducing a new requirement this year for any students who participate in a UROP mentoring grant project to also compose either a blog about their experience working on the mentoring grant or some kind of social media reel or photo album. Okay. Um, I'm very happy to take questions at this point, but that's everything that I had prepared to share with you all. My name is Noel. Um, if you don't have any questions, you can reach out to me at europe@hawaii.edu. I want to apologize too. I know we've been getting some questions about this in the Europe inbox, and I haven't had the chance to respond because we actually just made funding decisions for our student opportunities as part of our most recent application cycle, and I've been kind of consumed with onboarding them. But I will get to any questions that I haven't answered in the inbox so far pretty soon. But yeah, anybody want to ask? Oh, here we go in the chat. You mentioned under student eligibility, classified UH Mānoa undergraduate as of the award period. Does this mean the student needs to be classified by spring or summer? Uh, they need to be classified by the summer. Yeah. Right, because there, yeah, I understand this question. Yeah, there was a bit of overlap with the spring semester as well in terms of the award period, but definitely by summer.
Sorry, so for mentoring philosophy, you mean a description on how we interact with students during research activities? So what I mean is that, for example, explaining what is the workflow that we have in our labs. For example, in my case, students do like low level activity and high level analysis are directly performed from me or senior researcher, and after we have a feedback with students. So this kind of process we should describe.
Yeah, so that falls a bit more. It's the same question, but that question kind of has two parts, right? So what you described is much more of like the mentoring plan in terms of like the logistics of how the dynamic plays out. The philosophy section specifically is more of a kind of statement about your beliefs about what makes for successful mentorship of undergraduates, and it's a bit more abstract in that way. But the what you described and what I just mentioned, like those should be part of the same section.
Thank you.
Mhm. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, well, like I said, oh, chat. Have you funded other student-led exhibitions online in the library or other venue? Um, can you say a bit more about this? We have funded projects that students then turn into exhibitions and that they then can come back to us and apply for additional presentation funding for. But if maybe is the question, can you build in like dissemination of the research into your budget? If that's the question, then yes, definitely.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking in terms of like a small exhibit in the library and
Mm.
having the students do the research and
Mm.
mount the exhibit for the
Yeah.
opening of the fall semester.
I see. Yeah. So that's definitely something that's allowable. I think one of the currently displayed exhibits in the library it has to do with Indonesian agroforestry among indigenous groups there. That is something actually that our program funded, but via student funding. But yeah, if you wanted to incorporate expenses for that into your budget, or weave it into your project description and timeline, certainly.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Well, if there are no other questions, or if you have questions that come up later, like I said, please feel free to reach out to europe@hawaii.edu. I'm gonna get this recording processed, and I hope everybody who joined us today, I hope you all apply. Very much looking forward to receiving your proposals, and we thank you once again for your interest. I'll be around too, in the Zoom room if anybody wants to kind of chat one-on-one.